History remembers the dead, but it does not always forgive those who disturb them. Across continents and centuries, tombs have been built not simply to honor the departed, but to guard them, sealed behind stone, curses, and warnings meant to last forever. Some were the resting places of emperors. Others held warriors whose names once made entire nations tremble. And yet, again and again, ambition, curiosity, or simple greed led the living to break those seals. What followed has been debated for generations. Sudden illness, inexplicable accidents, entire expeditions undone within months of their triumph. Historians call it coincidence. Locals call it punishment. Whatever the explanation, the pattern repeats with unsettling consistency. A tomb is sealed, a warning is carved into its threshold, and centuries later, when the seal is finally broken, something always seems to follow. Tonight, we descend into 5 of history's most forbidden burial sites and trace what happened to the men and women who dared to open them. Some explanations are mundane: toxic spores, ancient bacteria, the simple cruelty of chance. Others remain stubbornly unexplained even now, in an age that claims to have answers for everything. Perhaps these are simply stories, shaped by fear and retold until they hardened into legend. Or perhaps some doors really were never meant to be opened. Decide for yourself. But remember, every keeper of these tombs believed they were protecting something, and every one of them, in their own way, may have been right. The Valley of the Kings lies on the western bank of the Nile, a stretch of arid limestone cliffs chosen by Egyptian pharaohs because its hidden ravines offered protection from grave robbers. For more than 500 years, kings of the New Kingdom were buried here in tombs cut directly into the rock, their chambers painted with spells meant to guide the dead safely into the afterlife and to punish anyone foolish enough to interfere. By the early 20th century, archaeologists believed the valley had given up nearly all its secrets. Every major tomb, it seemed, had already been found, looted, or catalogued. One name remained conspicuously absent from the historical record: Tutankhamun, a minor pharaoh who had ruled briefly and died young. Sometime around 1323 BC, British archaeologist Howard Carter disagreed with the prevailing wisdom. Funded by Lord Carnarvon, a wealthy English aristocrat, Carter spent years searching a section of the valley most experts considered exhausted. On November 4th, 1922, his workers uncovered a step cut into the bedrock. Within days, an entire staircase emerged, leading down to a sealed doorway stamped with royal insignia. The seal was unbroken. No one had entered in over 3,000 years. When Carter finally broke through into the antechamber weeks later, Lord Carnarvon asked if he could see anything. Carter's reply became one of archaeology's most famous lines. Wonderful things. Inside lay one of the only nearly intact royal tombs ever discovered: golden shrines, chariots, jewelry, and at the heart of it all, the boy king himself, still resting in his sarcophagus. The find made headlines around the world. Then, within months, the story took a darker turn. In April 1923, Lord Carnarvon was bitten by a mosquito on his cheek. He accidentally nipped the bite while shaving, and the wound became infected. Within weeks, he had developed blood poisoning, followed by pneumonia. He died in Cairo on April 5th, 1923, less than 4 months after the tomb was opened. Newspapers seized on the timing immediately. Reports claimed that at the exact moment of his death, the lights in Cairo flickered out across the entire city, and that back in England, his dog let out a single mournful howl and died as well. Investigators later found no reliable evidence for either claim, but the legend had already taken hold. Novelist Marie Corelli publicly warned that ancient Egyptian curses protected royal tombs, and that whoever dared enter would suffer dire punishment. The press needed little encouragement. Within a year, the phrase "the curse of the pharaohs" had entered popular vocabulary, and reporters began tracking the deaths of anyone connected to the excavation. George J. Gould, a financier who visited the tomb, reportedly died of a fever shortly after touring the site. Archibald Douglas Reed, a radiologist who X-rayed Tutankhamun's mummy, fell ill and died within days of completing the procedure. Richard Bethel, Carter's personal secretary, was found dead in his bed under circumstances that were never fully explained. Even Bethel's father, Lord Westbury, is said to have taken his own life shortly afterward, reportedly leaving a note referencing the horror of the curse. By the late 1920s, newspapers had attributed more than 20 deaths to the supposed curse, though statisticians who later examined the claim found something inconvenient for the legend. Of the 58 people present when the tomb was opened or who entered it in the following years, only 8 died within the following decade. Howard Carter himself, the man most directly responsible for breaking the seal, lived another 17 years, dying in 1939 of natural causes. Scientists have offered more grounded explanations for the apparent pattern of illness. Sealed tombs can harbor toxic mold spores, including aspergillus, which thrive in enclosed, humid spaces and can cause severe respiratory infections in those with weakened immune systems. Ancient organic material, including embalming agents and decayed textiles, can also release harmful bacteria when disturbed after millennia of dormancy. For Lord Carnarvon specifically, who was already in fragile health following a serious car accident years earlier, even minor infection could prove fatal. None of this fully satisfied the public imagination. The idea that ancient Egyptians had encoded a final, lethal warning into their tombs was simply too compelling to abandon. And in truth, some tombs did contain explicit threats. Inscriptions found in various Old Kingdom burial sites warn that those who violate the sanctity of the tomb will be judged by the great God, that their names will be forgotten, and that they will find no peace in the afterlife. Whether Tutankhamun's tomb contains such a curse remains disputed. No definitive inscription threatening death has ever been confirmed within the chamber itself, though fragments of protective spells, common to royal burials, were certainly present. What remains undeniable is the timing. A tomb sealed for 3,000 years, a wealthy patron dead within months, and a legend that has outlived nearly everyone connected to its creation. Far to the east, beneath a forested hill near the ancient Chinese capital of Xianyang, lies a tomb that has never been opened at all. It belongs to Qin Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, a ruler whose obsession with immortality shaped one of the most extraordinary burial complexes ever constructed. Qin Shi Huang ascended to power in 246 BCE as king of the state of Qin, and by 221 BCE had conquered the warring states that surrounded him, unifying China under a single ruler for the first time in its history. He standardized currency, weights, writing, and law, but he was equally consumed by fear of death. Court records describe his desperate search for an elixir of immortality, sending expeditions across the known world in search of mythical islands said to hold the secret to eternal life. When immortality could not be secured in life, the emperor turned his ambitions toward death itself, ordering the construction of a tomb complex so vast that historians believe it took nearly 400,000 laborers almost 4 decades to complete. The most famous portion of this complex, the Terracotta Army, was discovered by farmers digging a well in 1974. More than 8,000 life-sized soldiers, each with individually sculpted facial features, stood guard in battle formation, accompanied by terracotta horses, chariots, and bronze weapons remarkably well preserved after more than 2,000 years underground. The discovery stunned the world and is often called the 8th wonder of the ancient world. And yet the terracotta warriors are only the outer perimeter. The emperor's actual burial mound, a massive earthen pyramid rising nearly 50 meters above the surrounding plain, has never been excavated. Ancient historian Sima Qian, writing roughly a century after the emperor's death, left behind a chilling description of what lies inside. According to his account, the tomb contains a miniature replica of the emperor's entire empire, rivers and seas rendered in flowing mercury, constellations of pearls embedded in the ceiling to represent the night sky, and mechanical crossbows rigged to fire automatically at any intruder who breached the inner chamber. For decades, archaeologists dismissed parts of this account as exaggeration, the kind of mythologizing common in ancient histories written to flatter or terrify in equal measure. Then, in the 1980s, scientists conducted soil samples around the burial mound and discovered mercury concentrations dramatically higher than anywhere else in the surrounding region, in some areas nearly 100 times normal background levels. Sima Qian's account of rivers of mercury, dismissed for centuries as legend, suddenly appeared disturbingly accurate. This discovery transformed the conversation around the tomb. If the mercury rivers were real, then opening the chamber could release toxic vapor capable of poisoning anyone who entered, a death trap engineered more than 2,000 years ago and still potentially lethal today. Chinese archaeologists have made the decision, repeatedly reaffirmed over the past 4 decades, not to excavate the central tomb. Officially, the reasoning cites a lack of adequate preservation technology, citing the catastrophic deterioration that occurred when the painted terracotta warriors were first exposed to air and rapidly lost their vivid coloring within minutes of excavation. Unofficially, many researchers acknowledge a second concern, that the tomb may genuinely be rigged with hazards never meant to be disturbed. Whether mechanical crossbows still function after 2 millennia remains pure speculation. The wood and sinew of any triggering mechanism would almost certainly have decayed. But the mercury is real, verified, and measurable. It sits beneath the hill to this day, exactly as Sima Qian described, a silent testament to an emperor who built defenses against intruders that the modern world still hesitates to test. Local legends in the region have long held that disturbing the emperor's rest invites catastrophe, citing droughts, floods, and political upheaval that followed past attempts to investigate the area. Skeptics point out that China has experienced droughts and floods regardless of archaeological activity for thousands of years. But the emperor who once searched desperately for immortality may have achieved something close to it after all. Untouched, undisturbed, and protected by toxins his own scientists could never have fully understood, Qin Shi Huang continues to guard his empire from beneath the earth, exactly as he intended. In the rolling steppes of Mongolia, a different kind of forbidden grave exists, one defined not by elaborate construction, but by total, deliberate erasure. Genghis Khan, founder of the largest contiguous land empire in human history, died in August 1227, somewhere in the territory of the Western Xia Kingdom during a military campaign. What happened to his body afterward has remained one of history's most carefully guarded mysteries, by design. According to multiple historical accounts, Genghis Khan left explicit instructions that his burial site remain secret, unmarked, and forever unknown. The Secret History of the Mongols, the earliest surviving Mongolian chronicle, offers few details about his actual burial, a silence that appears intentional rather than accidental. Later accounts, written by Persian and Chinese historians who had access to Mongol oral traditions, describe extraordinary measures taken to ensure the location would never be found. The funeral procession reportedly killed anyone they encountered along the route to the burial site, soldiers, travelers, even entire villages, to prevent word of the location from spreading. Once the burial was complete, the soldiers who dug the grave were themselves killed by a second group of soldiers, who were then killed in turn by a third group, layer upon layer of silence enforced through systematic execution. Some accounts claim a river was diverted to flow directly over the burial site, permanently concealing it beneath the water. Others described thousands of horses being driven repeatedly across the area to trample any trace of disturbed earth, followed by the planting of a forest to camouflage the location entirely within the natural landscape. Whether every detail of these accounts is accurate remains impossible to verify, but the underlying intent is unmistakable. Genghis Khan and the empire he left behind wanted his grave to remain forever beyond reach. The reasoning may have been practical as much as spiritual. Mongol tradition held that disturbing a ruler's grave risked bringing catastrophe upon his descendants and his empire, a belief shared across many steppe cultures of the period. But there was a more immediate concern as well. A known grave could be looted, desecrated by enemies, or used as a symbol for rivals seeking to undermine the legitimacy of his successors. By erasing the location entirely, the Mongol state ensured that no army, no rival clan, and no future generation could ever use the great Khan's remains as a political weapon. For nearly 8 centuries, the strategy has worked. Despite numerous expeditions using ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, and even crowd-sourced analysis of aerial photographs, the tomb of Genghis Khan has never been located. Local legend in Mongolia holds that anyone who finds and disturbs the grave will unleash catastrophe, not merely upon themselves, but upon the nation itself. This belief is taken seriously enough that the Mongolian government has historically restricted archaeological access to the region believed to contain the burial site, the Ake Korig, or Great Taboo, an area considered sacred and forbidden long before any formal preservation laws existed. In 2015, a joint expedition involving American and Mongolian researchers using non-invasive scanning technology identified several promising sites within the region, structures and disturbances consistent with possible burial activity. Local authorities, citing both cultural sensitivity and the enduring taboo, declined to authorize further excavation. The mystery remains unsolved, not for lack of technology, but for a near-universal belief that some things are better left undiscovered. Unlike Tutankhamun's tomb, broken open by ambition, or Huang's mausoleum, guarded by chemistry, Genghis Khan's grave endures through something more elusive, total cultural consensus that the secret should die with everyone who ever knew it. In a sense, it already has. Far to the west, in the heart of Central Asia, lies the city of Samarkand, once the glittering capital of an empire that stretched from India to the Mediterranean. Within the blue-tiled mausoleum of Gur-e-Amir rests Timur, known to the west as Tamerlane, a 14th century conqueror whose military campaigns left an estimated 17 million dead across Asia and the Middle East. Even by the standards of his era, Timur's reputation for brutality was extraordinary, and so too was the legend that grew around his grave. Timur died in February 1405 while leading a campaign against Ming China, and his body was returned to Samarkand for burial beneath a tomb of dark green jade, among the largest pieces of jade ever used in funerary architecture. An inscription on the tomb, according to long-standing local tradition, carried an unambiguous warning: whoever opens this tomb will unleash an invader more terrible than I. For more than 5 centuries, the tomb remained sealed, respected by successive rulers who governed the region, whether out of reverence or fear of the legend itself. That changed on June the 19th, 1941. A team of Soviet archaeologists, led by anthropologist Mikhail Gerasimov, arrived in Samarkand under orders to open the tomb as part of a broader Soviet research initiative into Central Asian history. Despite warnings from local religious leaders, who reportedly pleaded with the team to abandon the excavation, citing both the inscribed curse and deep-seated cultural taboos against disturbing the dead, the Soviet scientists proceeded. They opened the tomb and confirmed Timur's remains within, along with physical evidence supporting historical accounts of a leg injury that had left him with a pronounced limp throughout his life. 3 days later, on June the 22nd, 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in human history against the Soviet Union. Within months, German forces had advanced deep into Soviet territory, inflicting catastrophic losses and beginning what would become one of the bloodiest conflicts of the 20th century. The timing did not go unnoticed. Soviet soldiers and civilians alike began circulating the story of Timur's curse, an ancient warning seemingly fulfilled with terrifying precision within 72 hours of the tomb's opening. The legend grew further in the years that followed. According to popular accounts, Soviet officials, increasingly desperate as the war turned catastrophic, ordered Timur's remains reburied with full Islamic funeral rites in late 1942 in an effort to lift the curse. Soviet forces achieved their decisive victory at Stalingrad shortly afterward, a turning point in the war that some attributed, however unofficially, to the reburial. Historians have long debated how much of this story reflects genuine wartime superstition versus retrospective myth-making, embellished after the fact to fit a satisfying narrative. What is verifiable is the documented timeline. The tomb was opened on June the 19th, and the invasion began on June the 22nd, a gap of just 3 days. Soviet records confirm Gerasimov's excavation took place exactly as described, and his subsequent facial reconstruction of Timur, based on detailed analysis of the skull, remains a landmark achievement in forensic anthropology, still referenced by researchers today. Skeptics note that Hitler had been planning Operation Barbarossa for months before the tomb was ever opened, making any connection a matter of coincidental timing rather than cause and effect. Believers counter that the precision of the timing, 3 days, after 5 centuries of an undisturbed warning, defies easy dismissal. Whatever the explanation, the legend of Timur's curse remains deeply embedded in the cultural memory of the region, a story repeated by guides in Samarkand to this day, delivered with the same mixture of solemnity and showmanship that has surrounded the tomb since the inscription was first carved into its jade surface. Our final tomb lies not in a desert or a steppe, but within the heart of medieval Europe, beneath Wall Cathedral in Krakow, Poland. Here rests Casimir IV, a Polish king who died in 1492, and whose tomb would remain undisturbed for nearly 5 centuries until a team of researchers reopened it in April 1973, intending to conduct historical and conservation studies ahead of the 481st anniversary of the king's death. The team consisted of 12 scientists and researchers, drawn from various academic institutions across Poland. Within weeks of the excavation, 4 members of the team had died. Within 2 years, the death toll had risen to 10 of the original 12 researchers, succumbing to a range of causes that initially appeared unrelated: heart failure, sudden infection, and in several cases, conditions that defied easy diagnosis at the time. Polish media seized on the pattern almost immediately, dubbing it the Curse of Casimir IV and drawing direct comparisons to the Tutankhamun deaths decades earlier. Unlike the Egyptian case, however, where statistical analysis ultimately undermined the curse narrative, the Polish tomb produced a far more concrete scientific explanation, one that would go on to reshape archaeological safety protocols worldwide. Investigators eventually identified the culprit, a fungus known as Aspergillus flavus, present in significant concentrations within the sealed burial chamber. Aspergillus flavus produces aflatoxins, among the most potent naturally occurring carcinogens known to science, capable of causing severe liver damage, immune suppression, and in concentrated exposure, rapid organ failure. Sealed for centuries in a low-oxygen, humid environment, the fungal spores had apparently lain dormant within the tomb, only to be released into the air the moment researchers broke the ancient seal. Unlike Tutankhamun's tomb, where mold exposure was theorized as a contributing factor among several possible explanations, The Wall Cathedral case offered something rarer in these stories: hard microbiological evidence directly linking the tomb's interior to the illnesses that followed. Researchers studying the case noted that several of the deceased had been present specifically during the initial days of excavation, when the chamber's air had been most heavily concentrated with disturbed spores, before proper ventilation protocols were established. This discovery proved significant far beyond Poland's borders. The Casimir case became one of the most frequently cited examples in archaeological safety literature, prompting institutions worldwide to implement stricter protocols for opening long-sealed burial chambers, including forced ventilation systems, protective respiratory equipment, and mandatory waiting periods before researchers entered newly opened spaces. In this sense, the curse of Casimir IV left a legacy far more concrete than ancient warnings or coincidental timing. It directly changed how archaeologists approach sealed tombs to this day, a scientific lesson learned at considerable human cost. And yet, even with a verified biological cause established, the story retains an unsettling resonance. A king, sealed away for 5 centuries, and a fungus that waited patiently in the dark until the seal was finally broken, claiming nearly the entire team that dared to disturb his rest. Whether one calls it a curse or simply biology operating exactly as biology does, the result for those 12 researchers was the same. 5 tombs, 5 warnings, carved, whispered, or simply implied by centuries of undisturbed silence. A pharaoh's chamber that claimed a wealthy patron within months. An emperor's mausoleum still too dangerous to open 2,000 years after his death. A conqueror's grave so completely erased that an empire's worth of secrecy still protects it today. A jade tomb whose ancient inscriptions seemed to predict catastrophe within 72 hours. And a medieval king whose resting place revealed a killer hiding not in legend, but in the very air itself. Science has offered explanations for nearly all of it. Toxic mold, dormant bacteria, statistical coincidence, the simple, mundane cruelty of infection in a pre-antibiotic age. And yet explanation has never fully erased the unease. Perhaps that is because these stories were never really about the supernatural at all. They are about something older and more universal, the instinct, shared across every culture and every century, that the dead deserve to rest undisturbed, and that those who forget this lesson do so at their own risk. The builders of these tombs could not have known about mercury poisoning or fungal spores, or the precise chemistry of decay, but they understood something else, that fear is its own kind of protection, and that a warning, carved into stone or whispered through generations, can guard a grave just as effectively as any wall. Some doors, it seems, really were never meant to be opened. And somewhere, in deserts and steppes and quiet cathedral crypts, more of them are still waiting.